Okay, cool. So the first thing I want to just talk about is being an artist and why I chose to do an album. There were a few things that kind of like led to that. I've always seen myself as a pastor, as an educator, as a musician, but really stepping into the role of being a front artist that was being produced by someone else was a new experience for me. So this was a first-time project for me in that regard. I was finishing up my grad school with McNally Smith, and there was a need for a graduate program or kind of a capstone project that I needed to do for the graduate degree. And I decided to launch my own brand as an independent artist to serve that project. And as a part of doing that, I chose to record, write, and arrange an entire album basically myself. So that's kind of what led up to this. I spent a significant amount of time songwriting and in the song selection and song arranging process. George's like, yes, yes, he did. And we'll get into the timeline in a little bit. But kind of before I hand it off to George, I want to just say that because of the project being what it was, I knew that I wanted it to be something that was professional and that would be a product that would last for a long time and be something that I would be personally proud of, as well as be something that would be inspirational to you, to my students. That was important to me. And so because of that, I knew that I needed to not just do this by myself. I knew that kind of going strictly the kind of the indie artist route was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to incorporate a lot of people into the project to make it stronger, because I know that there are certain things that I can do well, and there are things that I need help with. And so I knew that because of that, I really wanted to involve multiple people to help make it much stronger than what I could do on my own. And so because of that, I asked George to produce the album. George leads worship at the church that Maria and I and the boys attend. And so there was a relationship kind of already established there. But I knew from day one that George wasn't just a worship leader, and that he wasn't just someone who knew how to play guitar and bass and keyboard and sing. Like, I knew that. Like, it was very obvious to me. And so I talked to George and about producing this album, and he agreed. And so that was kind of like what led up to the project and what got George involved. And so I would love you to share a little bit about your experience as a producer and just what, not even just like what the scope of this album is, but what producers' roles can be.
Well, I guess a producer can have a couple of different roles. Like nowadays, I guess when we hear the term producer, we just imagine the person that's like, making the track or making the beat. But that's not exactly what a producer does. That is a composer. That's a beat maker. You know what I mean? A producer is somebody that kind of oversees the whole project and makes it cohesive. A lot of times that involves them making sure things happen like according to a deadline, things happen according to a budget. But for what we've done, we kind of like married a bunch of things because both of us, we're instrumentalists as well. And I engineered the album as well as kind of, helped with some of the composition things. Yeah.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about like some of the nuts and bolts about like how the timeline and the mix turnaround and the mastering kind of like worked itself out. Like, I think it'd be cool if we could hit on some of these things for these guys. So just talk about like, let's talk about like timeline, some stuff, because I feel like there were like sessions that we thought were going to be like
yeah,
much shorter than they were.
Yeah, man, my goodness. Some of these sessions took like, if I feel like weeks at a time to do. Like, we would revisit things. When you first start a project, when we first started this one, Kurt just had kind of like, yeah, we're gonna map this out from like August until September. We're gonna record all this stuff. It didn't work that way just because we had revisions and once we had like a working rough mix of a song together, like Curtis would be like, well, what if we added this? Or what if we added this random percussion thing? Or if I was like, what if we added horns in this part? So I think it's good to be flexible when working on a project and not give yourself like such like tight deadlines because the songs are gonna grow and evolve the more that you listen to them. And some ideas that you have might absolutely be horrible, like when you try to lay them down in the studio. And you just kind of have to go back to the drawing board, like what was different? Like Shine was completely different than we envisioned it to be.
So you guys have all heard Shine because you were part of Invisible Christmas in some way. That I wrote that song for A Visible Christmas. That was my heart behind it. But the original idea of that was not Motown. The original idea was kind of like this EDM,
Like EDM, calypso,
kind of dance
kind of fist
thing.
pumping thing. Yeah, it was. It was like
The switch was a good decision.
So literally, we got into the studio, and okay, just confession: I teach songwriting. I would not recommend this to the songwriting majors in here, but this is what happened. Because I had a vision of where the song was going to be, and we decided to scratch it. We scratched the EDM thing because the rest of the album wasn't going in that direction. That's why we scratched the EDM thing. If the album would have taken on more of a digital age kind of like vibe, then that would have worked out really, really well. But because it wasn't going there, we scratched the artistic vision of Shine altogether. And so literally, we were in the studio, and I had these lyrics. That's all I had was lyric. I didn't have a melody. I didn't have a progression. I had nothing. It was just the lyric. And I looked at him and I was like, so this album's kind of Motown already, so maybe we should do a Motown song. And so George picked up the bass and started playing the riff that's on the album, and I just started singing, and that's literally how that song was born.
It just
and
happened.
I think it was probably, about an hour later that the song was done?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the song
Like
itself.
the template of it, like how we wanted to do it.
Yeah. And John was there because John Nowicki played drums on the whole album, and kind of the format of the tracking was we laid down all the drums first so that we had the form, and then we built in pieces later.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. So you gotta. I guess when you're planning something like this, you gotta leave in some room for revision because sometimes something just won't work, and you just kind of have to pull it all together. And also, I think we set pretty realistic mix deadlines, but there have been other projects I've worked on where I've had a session with a client that's come in and they've recorded a song in maybe 3-4 hours, and they think that it's going to automatically be mixed and ready for them to take. Well, I paid you hourly for the session. I'm like, that's completely different than mixing. That's a completely different process. That's going to take time for me to clean stuff up, edit things, slap on the effects, make sure there's a balance. So completely different process. I feel like everybody knows that. But it's still good to be mindful that when you're in a session and you're like, man, I'm so excited about this song. It's a really good vibe. It's a really good groove. I want to take it home. You have to give the engineer a little bit of extra time to do it. And typically, a good song mix, the base of it is going to be about 4 to 6 hours in just mixing. That's just editing stuff, cleaning stuff up, getting the balance on it, and then you submit that to the artist, and then they give you maybe 1 or 2 conversations of revisions, and then that's about it.
You're saying per song?
Per song. Per song.
4 to 6 hours per song.
That's just the base of it, though. The base of it. So with this, man, since there were so many different elements in songs from this album, horns and strings, the average amount of time it would take me to mix a song was 8 or 9 hours per song, just because there was so much to be in. There was so much involved. So Yeah, just be mindful of the fact that it's going to take a while for that to happen.
And what, you know, again, I think we did have some realistic mix expectations
Yeah.
for this project. What did it look like though for you as far as like when you'd send me a mix and I would send back comments, like I felt like it was a once and done kind of thing.
Yeah.
What are some other experiences that you've had with other artists that have not done that? That's been frustrating for you, or that seems inappropriate, perhaps?
Well, I mean, what helped? I'm gonna start with what helped first with you. You're like super organized. Like you had everything like all put together in like this Google Drive, Google Docs spreadsheet type of way where I could like see exactly in sequence. Like you had like time and minute stamps. Like this is what I want to happen here. This is what I want to happen. So you were thorough. So we only had to have like one conversation about what needed to change. Other artists, they'll call me. I'm like, well, I think it needs something different. I'm like, can you tell me what it is that it needs? So I think it helps if you have, if you're as thorough as possible and try to condense that, because there's nothing that kind of like kills a song more for a mix engineer than somebody that goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Like you have to kind of trust, I guess, the instincts of the engineer. And if it's somebody that you don't really trust to mix your stuff,
Right.
they shouldn't be mixing your stuff in the first place. You know what
Preach.
I mean? Yeah.
Preach.
So, but what helps artists and engineers kind of like have a good relationship in that way is if you're detailed, if you're organized. And I mean, try to keep the comments to like, you know, one interaction, one or two. Like going back and forth will just kind of kill the song.
What for you, like as a producer, like what have been the different scenarios that you've been in terms of like working with an artist in terms of arrangement or composition? Like obviously our experience was very collaborative in terms of like we were writing and arranging pretty much together. But talk about like what are some of the different scenarios that you've been a part of that have looked. It's been like I'm doing this session at 5 o'clock and it's whoa, and then I'm doing this at 10 and it's way different.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll have like a worship session that I'm working on, and then like I have like a folk session and like a hip hop thing where sometimes the artist will come in with a producer that already has like a vision of how they want things to go, and I'm just there to literally push record and make sure that things, you know, run smoothly in that. And then I have other sessions, sometimes in the same day, where like they come in with like pretty much nothing but an idea, and somehow I have to magically pull that together. You know.
So there's two extremes to it.
Yeah, it's two extremes, and it helps to be versatile enough to handle both. But most of the time, like when you're doing sessions, like a lot of the artists will have no idea kind of where they want it. They just expect you to make it happen for them.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of
Yeah.
work on the fly.
What's for me, I asked you what you wanted to get paid, and you told me, and I paid you. What I also know that you gave me a very kind and respectful deal.
I gave you the homie discount. The homie discount.
What's appropriate, you know, in terms of budgeting and for recording, for mixing?
Well,
What do you typically charge?
Typically,
people?
what I charge at my studio, we charge $35 an hour to record, which is super low. It's the lowest price you're gonna get. Shameless plug. But I don't know. Like for a mix, typically I'll charge around $300 to $450 per mix, and that includes revisions and all of that other stuff. Mastering, I don't like to master individual songs. I like to master like entire projects. So I'll do like an entire project rate for $300.
So they all sound cohesive.
Yeah, because I don't want to have to try to match what the next person does. I have like my own process of doing it.
Is that a full album or an EP, or would it be different?
It'd be different for an EP. A full album, I'm guessing, would be like around 10 to 11 tracks. Like that would be the rate for that.
The EP is like 4 tracks.
4 to 5 or 6. Yeah.